The Ryan Jespersen Show, weekday mornings at 9 on 630 CHED.
Knowing the headlines isn't always enough. Sometimes you need to talk about it. For stimulating conversation on the day's hot topics, this is your station. This is your show. The Ryan Jespersen Show on 630 CHED, Edmonton's breaking news and conversation station.
Our thanks to Kelly Keane for joining us. Just absolutely love Kelly's appearances on this show. Hey, what a straight shooter. I love this text from Adam. He says, what an awesome guest. A level-headed financial educator shouldn't be such a rarity, but in my experience, it is. He says, I can't wait to connect with Kelly. And how about what she left us with? In the last 90 seconds of that interview, I go, in the context of Mental Health Week, give us something to chew on. Give us something to walk with into the weekend. And if you're just tuning in now, if you're tuning in your appointment tuning, we call it, for our Friday roundtable, I'm going to introduce our panel, our guests, in just a moment. But I loved what Kelly said. It was the whole thing about keeping up with the Joneses and where society's trending and how 50% of millennials are sort of stacking themselves up against their colleagues, their friends, their peers. And she talked about the mental health impact of that. And it's amazing to hear from Sarah B. She says, I'm 35, so I think, Sarah, by the math, you would qualify as a millennial. She says, I willingly say I can't afford it. I love this out of Elrose, Saskatchewan. Listener says, the best thing that ever happened to me was realizing there's no shame in the phrase, I can't afford it. They say it changed my entire life. And how about this from Gamer Brian? Says, I got no problem saying no to people because I can't afford things. I've also told me that if you want me to go to something, you're covering the cost. He says it's not a taboo to approach things like that, and I don't know why people think it is. Let's turn the page here. This is our tradition on Fridays, our in-studio roundtable. The Alberta Secular Conference goes this weekend down to the Coast Plaza Hotel in Calgary. You can check out AB Secular Conference. .yolasite.com. Just Google the Alberta Secular Conference. Luke Fevin, a good friend of this show. Luke is, I guess, technically, Luke, you're the director of the Society of Edmonton Atheists, but I think it's fair to call you're an education advocate. You're a public education advocate, and you've often spoken out strongly in that context. Welcome back to CHED.
Great to be here. Absolutely. Public education.
Bradley Peter is sitting next to you. Bradley returning to this show. He's a national board member, also represents Edmonton and Dying with Dignity Canada. Bradley, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And you're joined as well by Karen Lumley-Kerr. Karen is the co-founder of this conference, and I'm allowed to say this, right, about the hood?
Sure, yeah.
The costume?
The costume.
You're one of the
I'm
Alberta handmaids.
I am an Alberta handmaid, yes.
Yeah, people are going to, this is, I think, maybe the first time anyone's seen heard one of the Alberta handmaids speak.
Under his eye.
I don't even get the reference. I don't know. Because we're doing crossovers today, it just seems we keep asking one guest to talk about what the previous guest talked about. When's the last time any of the three of you, this has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about, when's the last time you told somebody you couldn't afford something? When's the last time you said, I'm not going to this, I'm not going on the trip, I'm not doing something because I can't afford it?
Wow.
Your faces look just like mine. We're proving Kelly's point.
Yeah.
We're proving Kelly's point. I don't know the last time I said I can't. A buddy of mine went to Ibiza a few years ago on a boys' trip, and I said I can't afford it, but that's because it was like 10 grand. But we don't say it, do we? We try to keep up our
appearances.
Sorry,
can't make it.
Yeah. Sorry, can't make it.
I can tell you the last time I did something I couldn't afford.
I do that every week, buddy. I do it every week. Hey, Karen, You're the co-founder of this Alberta Secular Conference.
Yeah.
What's the point? Why is it necessary?
So, I know Luke's the director of the SEA, but I'm also the president of the SEA.
The Society of Edmonton Atheists.
But I think, so I'm also involved with the Dying with Dignity movement, and I'm also involved with the school issue. And I think I just had I was spread too thin. I was trying to do too much activism, and I thought, hey, you know what? Let's just have a day or a weekend where everyone can come together, and I'll just give them the platform instead of having to be involved in each and every topic. So let's bring in each specific person to talk about stuff. So that's kind of the point, to get us all together and talk about all the issues. Some of them people don't know, like people that are pro-choice possibly aren't involved with the Dying with Dignity movement, but there's a lot of crossover there with what your arguments and your reasons for supporting those causes are. And same with the school issue. I found recently, because I'm involved with both, some of the Dying with Dignity people didn't think the school issue was relevant to them, but all the arguments are actually the same. It's always the bishop's reasons for why this shouldn't happen. We're fighting the same ideology, so it made sense to kind of put them all in the room and say, look, you guys have more in common than you think.
My first introduction to the word secular was growing up in a religious household and being exposed to a lot of Christian rock music and a lot of Christian music, and then there was the secular music, and every once in a while we were allowed to listen to it, and then as we got older, so my interpretation of the word secular was always kind of like the absence of a faith influence. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I think secular gets used in two different ways. There's the way that we use it in law. There's the way that the Supreme Court uses it, which means separation of church and state. And in the more recent rulings with Sanguinet and City Prayer, the fact that the state should abstain from religion. So it shouldn't be for religion, it shouldn't be against religion, it shouldn't favor one religion over other religions. So there's that official secular, but then secular also gets used, and I think it gets used in the faith community as a negative thing, where people think that secular means anti-religion, and it really doesn't. It's really more just a recognizing that there is a space in a multicultural society where we don't need to be either pushing religion or pushing against religion, that there are just spaces that need to be safe for everybody.
It's interesting in the context, and Bradley, let me tee this up for you. I mean, in the context of dying with dignity or medically assisted death or what do you prefer to call it, oftentimes people will invoke the playing God idea. It automatically implies a religious or faith-based or a deity connection.
Yeah, so, I mean, from our perspective, this is a secular issue. We want people to be able to die in a way that respects their religion, but we also want people to be able to die in a way that respects their lack of religion. So in Alberta, it becomes very a prominent issue because we have this Catholic hospital system, right? So in Alberta, some people maybe won't have the option of dying in a way that respects their choice to not be religious, and people who don't want to have a death that is kind of controlled by Catholic values. So dying with dignity across Canada is a secular issue.
Is Alberta more religiously influenced than other jurisdictions in Canada?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was a study done in 2012 that still horrifies me. That was a majority of Albertans did not believe in the theory of evolution. Alberta is the most religious province in Canada.
Hang on a second. Are you saying the majority of Albertans believe in creation?
No, but didn't believe in evolution.
Well, so then what do they believe?
Well, I think the numbers were 30-something% believed in creation. There was a grey area that didn't believe in anything in particular, and then there was a minority that believed in the theory of evolution. 2012 study, maybe Angus Reid, Ipsos, I think. And of course, we're one of only 3 provinces that still has a religious school system, a state-run, publicly funded religious school system. So, yeah, absolutely. And of course, as Bradley is talking about, we have a Catholic hospital system. So, I'm from St. Albert. If I want palliative care, I think there's 170 beds. But I'm going to end up in a Catholic bed. My dying days, Catholic imagery, and no right to assisted dying. So that's not acceptable to me.
I just want the two of you to go. The two of you are looking at each other trying to decide who to go, but I can tell you both got a lot to say here.
I mean, from the work that I do, most of the presentations that I give, these are presentations in churches. So, people who support assisted dying are not all atheists. People who support assisted dying are religious people. So the fact that we are maybe a religious province, it shouldn't be a problem with medical aid in dying. But the problem is that one specific religion, the Catholic religion, has kind of an ownership of the palliative care those long-term care types of institutions in some specific communities. So yeah, I mean, a lot of our supporters are religious people, and a lot of the churches do support medical aid in dying, but it's that whole secular issue of one becomes kind of takes over all of the others, and that's where the problem is. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem that...
Yeah, didn't Dying with Dignity do a poll across Canada, and it was like something like almost 80% of Catholics agreed with medical assistance in dying, even though the Catholic Church is telling them not to.
Yeah, and I think this is a common thread, is that the perspective of the leadership of these institutions often doesn't jive with the perspective of the actual membership. Yeah. And so when I do debates with, say, a rabbi, the rabbi might not agree with me, but when I go talk to the membership, they're all like, oh, we're on your side, don't tell him, but we agree with you. So there is this disconnect between the leadership and the actual membership who are accessing these services.
Mm-hmm. That's probably been the case throughout all of time, hasn't it? That there have been, I mean, isn't that kind of the point of faith leadership? I mean, it's and I guarantee you, Luke, every time we talk, people are going to believe that you're here and that I'm facilitating this conversation to pile on Catholics. I guarantee it. I haven't even looked at the text line yet, but I guarantee that people are going to perceive this to be an all-out assault. And you cannot deny that the Catholic faith, the Catholic community in Alberta, has been in the crosshairs more. Actually, I take that back. Let me develop the thought, and then I'll tell you why it's a flawed statement. I think the Muslims have been more in the crosshairs than the Catholics. But on talk shows, the Catholics have been taking their fair share of lashings and lickings because we talk about things like Catholic influence in legislation or in schools or whatever, right? I mean, I'm looking at the text line right now, and this is, you know what, I actually really appreciate this from John, who says, I'm actually not religious. He says, but I don't understand why a good number of atheists seem to be obsessed with mocking and ruining religion for those of faith.
I completely understand why, for the religious, it can feel like an attack on their faith, because what you have is a historic embedded privilege into today's society. And if we're really about equality, and if we're really about following the Canadian Charter, then that historic privilege needs to get rolled back. So I really do understand why people of faith go, I feel like we're under attack, I feel like we're having something taken away. Because you are. If you want equality, that's got to get rolled back. But it's not an attack on the person. It's not an attack on that person's happiness or whatever it is that they take to jive in this life. I got no wish to attack that. But there is a reasonable conversation to be had about, is this the best way to run an education system? Is this the best way to run a health service? Should we still be favouring one religion over all others in prayers at City Hall or in a school? So there are reasonable conversations to be had that are not personal attacks.
Yeah, and it's important in how you approach them, isn't it? I mean, you're here on the text line, 630. Here we go again, another Christian Catholic bashing panel from Ryan Jespersen. It seems to come up every couple of weeks or so. And it's because, I mean, people have a difficult time having difficult conversations about where entitlement should be and where influence should be and where funding should go and where rights should be extended and where rights should be protected.
And again, from Dying with Dignity's perspective, this is not about judging how a Catholic person chooses to die or the type of end-of-life care that a Catholic person chooses to receive. We're just saying that we respect your right to, choose whatever services, respect your definition of dignity, but we're asking for the same in return. So there is no judgment. If someone chooses to not access medical aid in dying, that is their choice.
Well, Bradley, isn't it actually, isn't part of the context of what you're doing a protection of someone's personal beliefs and personal choice? Isn't it? Isn't what you're fighting against the imposition of faith influence as a blanket across the board on legislation?
Exactly. And really what it is this extension of patient autonomy that we already have in so many of our decisions. We have the right to refuse life-saving treatments. We have the right to discontinue life-saving treatments. So medical aid in dying becomes an extension of that autonomy. And what we're really trying to say is we need to respect patient autonomy and not force our beliefs on onto people who are suffering.
Ian in Stony Plain says that's a pretty encouraging study that Luke references. He says, I'm glad that Alberta has a lot of people willing to hold a variety of opinions instead of being told what to think. He says on the broader conversation, of course, some social structures and laws are religiously influenced. In a modern secular environment, moral law is flexible and cultural religious consensus is one of the guidelines that are used.
You know what? I think, the golden rule is an awesome rule. And before, if we really want to set the text line on fire, we'll just point out that the golden rule predates Christianity. But the golden
do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah, absolutely. Which fails logically, but that's a night.
Yeah, I was going to argue with you that
that's actually
perfect.
a night for a good bottle of scotch.
What do you mean?
Well, because there may be someone, you may have a religious fundamentalist who thinks that under certain conditions they should be punished, put to death, beaten, and I don't want them to do to me what they would do to themselves. So logically there is a flaw in the argument. But for the most part, I think, it doesn't matter whether you get it from Islam or Sikhism or Christianity or humanism. If we all just come back to the golden rule, then we'll be okay.
We'll be back with our panelists Luke Fevin and Karen Lumley-Kerr, Bradley Peter. The Alberta Secular Conference goes this weekend. Ched Nation, we're taking your observations on this conversation on the text line to 630. When we come back, I want to ask you about the Alberta Handmaids.
Sure.
What they're all about. They're the new raging grannies, right?
Okay. Except we're quiet.
That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. The Alberta Secular Conference goes in Calgary this weekend at the Coast Plaza Hotel. Our guests in studio, Luke Fevin, Director of the Society of Edmonton Atheists, Bradley Peter, a National Board Member, Dying with Dignity Canada, and Karen Lumley, the co-founder of the conference, President of the Society of Edmonton Atheists, and Alberta Handmaid. Now, Ralph Klein had his raging grannies holding him accountable in the steps of the Alberta legislature.
And they're still around. The raging
they
grannies
sure
are
as
still
hell are.
Yeah.
And can I say sure as hell to a group of atheists? That probably to you means there's no such thing, but they are. Jason Kenney will have his Alberta Handmaids. With due respect to Margaret Atwood, I'm not that familiar with The Handmaid's Tale. Who are the Alberta Handmaids and why are you doing what you're doing?
So I'll back up. For those of you out there that don't know The Handmaid's Tale, it's pretty much a dystopian future where women and LGBT have been stripped of their rights. So the handmaids are the only fertile women left on Earth, and they're used only for that purpose, is to have babies against their will and things like that. So that's kind of where the costume idea comes from, because we are petrified of that world.
So people will see you in your red robes and
Yeah.
your white bonnets.
Yep.
And typically looking down at the floor and staying silent.
Yeah, so the handmaids aren't allowed to talk. They're only allowed to say a few things when they're out in public. So it's silent protesting. And if you engage with us, we'll either tell you blessed be the fruit or under his eye, which are the two statements that the handmaids are allowed to say.
How have you been received by Albertans? Where have you been recently? What are people saying to you?
So the first handmaid, we've had a couple of handmaids down in Lethbridge because we're actually grassroots. We just organize on social media, and some of us don't know each other. So the Lethbridge group have been out protesting in front of MLAs or MPs that are very pro-life groups. There was a bus ad that ran down there for anti-choice, so they've got some pictures in front of the buses. But then there's others of us up here. We stood in front of nomination day when the school trustees and everything were putting in their nominations. So that was pretty much Tyler Deuce and Shirley Adams that we were kind of targeting with that one. We've been down to Red Deer for the UCP convention. We've also protested.
How are you received down there?
That was interesting, and I find kind of ironic. So the day before, there was the bubble zone legislation at the ledge, and they obviously walked out on that. People don't know the news. It was a bubble zone is to protect women at abortion clinics, because you've got the protesters there, but they're harassing you. They're shouting out at you and trying to pray and things like that, rather than being respectful. So they're trying to put in a legislation for a 50-meter bubble zone, and they walked out, so they weren't willing to debate it. So we get to the conference. I checked with the city of Red Deer prior to where the public and private property lines were and made sure that we were standing on public land. Yet the manager of the hotel came out at the request, obviously, of the UCP members and asked us to move. And we were silent. Like, it's not like we were even engaging. So they were really just scared of our red dresses, I guess. And where they asked us to stand, ironically, ended up being 52 meters away.
Huh. You can follow the Handmaids on Twitter, by the way. It's a pretty interesting account, Handmade Alberta. We're going to get to some of your comments on the text line. I like this from Bry Guy. Says, I identify as Christian. I believe in equal rights for all races, sexual orientations. I'm pro-choice, and I am in support of medically assisted dying. I also believe in creation and adaptation, which differs slightly from evolution. I also believe you can believe any religion you choose or none at all. He says, so I don't actually think you have to be an atheist to have socially progressive opinions. He says, I really am enjoying this panel. And he says, where do you land on today's discussion, Ryan? Maybe we'll get into that after these.
This is the Ryan Jespersen Show on 630 CHED, Edmonton's breaking news and conversation station.
Halfway through our Friday roundtable with a panel that is certainly inspiring CHED Nation to chime in, which is the best kind of conversation. Karen Lumley-Kerr is the co-founder of the Alberta Secular Conference, president of the Society of Edmonton Atheists. Luke Fevin, the director there, and also a public education advocate. Bradley Peter here, national board member, Dying with Dignity Canada. It was a great question heading into break. Listener says, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I'm pro-choice. I support dying with dignity or medically assisted death. Can there be such thing as a religious secularist?
Yes, I have lots of friends that are progressive Christians and other faiths, and are secularists. And in fact, one of the most famous is one that I admire greatly, ex-education minister David King,
friend of the show.
Absolutely, and a classy guy. That's a devout and spiritual guy, and he is absolutely a secularist. So you can be progressive, you can be a secularist, and you can have faith. Absolutely.
This is an interesting point from Peter, and I want to kind of, just to let the three of you as well as our listening audience know, I hope that we can just swerve around these next 25 minutes and have kind of a free-flowing conversation. So we'll weave in some commentary from our listeners. You feel free to take it and run with it. Peter says, I'm wondering if your panel might be able to speak to the issue of the Catholic School Board in Red Deer paying to transport busloads of students to Edmonton to protest on a school day.
So before Luke's going to answer this one for us, I think, I'm going to jump in quickly and just say, so the Alberta Handmaids were also at the March for Life yesterday, because I don't think I got around to saying that when we were talking about them before. Silently protesting, but that was something we noticed, that there was a bunch of buses there, and it was the majority of the group in front of the ledge were high school kids, so we asked them where they'd come from, and we went and saw the side of the buses had Red Deer Catholic on them, so they were being bussed in on a school day.
Can't that be a lesson in social activism? And I'm trying to be fair here, right? Can't it be?
That was actually the first thing I was going to say. Is that it's okay up to a point, but here's the thing: is it's always just the religious causes. It's if they were, do they bust them into the ledge to demonstrate for more funding for science, or for more funding for STEM subjects? Or no, they don't. They bust them in from Drayton Valley and Hinton and Red Deer and goodness knows where to come in to vote to what is really a religiously charged issue. So. Do I think it's black and white? No, I don't. But it is always, this is the issue that we're busing kids from their schools, and you can't tell me we're not using public dollars to do it. And so...
one of the things that I find is interesting, and again, people don't like being challenged on this, but I speak from my lived experience, so I don't care what anybody says about what I think. This is my lived experience. I always find it very interesting that in conversations like this, people would argue that the religious influence in curriculum and education is perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, it's protected in the Alberta Act and blah, 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 and we go on about it, we hear about it all the time. and that religion should be a part of curriculum and it should be part of school. But then the same folks, in talking about, like, for example, sex ed, say that this should be kept for the home. This should be a conversation between parents and children. This should not be spoken about in schools. The school has no role in talking about issues about morality or self-worth or sexuality. And I can't really understand how somebody can speak out of both sides of their mouth like that. Either religion and ethics and morality absolutely 100% do belong in a broad context in schools, or not at all. Agree or disagree?
Agree. There's a difference between learning about religion as well. I don't know anyone that disagrees with the fact that we should have a comparative religions course of study in school. I think that's valuable. Religion is obviously a very big part of this world, very important to a lot of people. But there's a big difference between that and actually pushing religious traditions and faith stories as being literally true. And I think what is dangerous is when you have children and you put them in a building and an environment where they think they're being taught factual truths, and we mix in religious faith traditions from trusted people in that environment. I think we do children a disservice and their ability to critically think their way to their own opinions on these things.
Our guest joining us here in studio, like literally immediately before departing for Cowtown. The Alberta Secular Conference goes there at the Coast Plaza Hotel this weekend. Back to the text line. Plus, I want to ask the three of you, what else are you talking about there? I'm sure that there's going to be more than just, and no offense, but, choice, dying with dignity, and education. We'll get into that in just a second. The Alberta Secular Conference goes this weekend down in Calgary. Luke Fevin, Karen Lumley-Kerr, and Bradley Peter, our guests. I'm going to ask permission, Luke, live on the air to...
Yeah, let's do it.
May I? Okay.
Yeah.
This is going to surprise some people. What you were just sharing about your own personal perspective and your own personal family life. Just take it away. This is. You had me on the edge of my seat.
So I'm pro-choice, and the conversation off air here was the fact that I said at some point in the future I believe that that abortion will become rightly illegal, that there won't be choice because there'll be the medical ability and the societal ability for us to take a life force, a potential life, not a baby, but a zygote, and transfer it out of a woman with minimal inconvenience, and then have that life force grow and have its chance in this universe, which, as an atheist, I believe that a conscious existence in this universe is the greatest gift, and that tends to surprise people. And then from there we bumped into accidentally the fact that in our own personal lives, my wife and I have a little boy. The story ends well. He's 10 and he's awesome, but waters broke at 19 weeks, and we weren't just advised to have a D&C. They actually started the process because it was anticipated that that's what we would do. And my wife and I, despite the fact that we're cold-hearted non-believers, really believed that child, that baby, deserved its chance, and so my wife was astounding and kept him into 26 weeks. He was born at 26 weeks. We spent almost 6 months in NICU. Thank you, NICU. If you're connected to NICU, I could start crying for what you did. But anyway, I think that often surprises people that you can be an atheist, you can be pro-choice, but you can still make choices in your own personal life, and that's what pro-choice really means, is that you don't get to speak for someone else and what they should do.
Wow. Okay. That's heavy stuff. Do you talk to your boy at that? I mean, he's 10. That's pretty heavy stuff for a 10-year-old. Does he know his story?
Yes, he does.
Yeah. Is he more, generally speaking, maybe more enlightened or more aware than others might be?
No, he's a fantastic pain in the ass.
Now, I made a crucial mistake of throwing to break right before there was a storm rolling in, and it looked like there was an argument brewing here, and any radio host worth his or her salt should have let it develop. Karen and I could see you watching Luke talk, and it struck me that you might just disagree with a comment that he made.
Well, there was a couple of things. More the sex ed part, I don't think that should be up to being left taught at home. I think a lot of parents don't have those conversations with their kids, or maybe if they've got pro-life stances, they're going to have misinformation. I don't want to say lie. They've probably been taught those things themselves, but there can be some misinformation floating about, and that's worrying for me. So I think sex education needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to be evidence-based, and it needs to be taught in schools. So that was the one thing I was going to say. I kind of just wanted to make sure that point was put across. The other one is I don't think abortion's going to become the way. I don't think what's going to happen in this sci-fi world in the future that you just gave us with the I think we're going to have such good birth control that we will have 100% control over whether we get pregnant or not in the first place.
That's a good point.
There was I'm going to try to find this quickly. There was a really interesting tweet yesterday. I don't know if you must follow Michael Corrin.
Of course, yes,
obviously, who's had his own fascinating journey.
Yep.
Right, a very conservative columnist and commentator for quite some time, and now certainly has swung to the center at the least. And he tweeted yesterday, "Today is the March for Life. But if they truly wanted to reduce abortion rates, they'd support modern sex ed in schools, readily available contraceptives, universal and publicly funded daycare, and female equality, and most of them oppose all of those." Is that a fair statement?
Bang on.
It's bang on. One of my signs said the best way to stop abortion is access for birth control.
Mm-hmm. For a lot of people, that's a non-starter. People of faith in some communities, right?
Yeah, Catholics
obviously
don't allow birth control. Yeah.
Except for all those that use it, of
Except
course.
for all the Catholics that do use it, yeah.
Yeah. Lauren Corbett, who's a great friend of this show, wonders, and he's tying into a conversation we had earlier, girls allowed in the Boy Scouts. It came up as part of a conversation about masculinity, and what a show it's been. Lauren says, if girls are allowed in Boy Scouts, are guys allowed to be handmaids? He says, I'm asking for a friend.
Of course they are. We are inclusive, so men come and join us. You can't see your face over those bonnets anyway, so.
What else are you going to be teeing up at this Alberta Secular Conference? I mean, we've talked about dying with dignity. We've talked about education.
Yeah.
We've talked about the pro-choice or pro-life or anti-choice, however you choose to phrase it. What else will you be talking about?
Yeah, so we have a lady coming from BC that's going to be talking about the Bountiful group. She has escaped that group, the polygamist group from BC. A couple of their leaders just got charged and stuff. So that's going to be a fantastic story to hear about how she lived through that and was one of many wives.
What's the let me ask you, and I don't ask you to speak for her, but what's the secularist implication there? Is it? I mean, ultimately, extremely, you can't shut down faith-based communities.
It's a fundamentalist religion that was obviously going against the laws, the secular laws of our land. Say polygamy obviously is illegal, so that's how that kind of ties in. We've also got some speakers coming to talk to us about residential schooling. Obviously, those were run by churches, but also the government. But they'll talk to how that changed. Even the views LGBT face now in First Nations, the view changed because of the influence of the other type of religious views. We've got, obviously, the MAID panel, the Catholic school panel. We've got a couple of ex-Muslims coming to speak to us as well. So that'll be interesting. One of them's talking about feminism in Muslim countries, and the other one will talk about the Muslim enlightenment that he sees going on in Muslim-majority countries right now, too. That's Ali Rizvi, who wrote The Atheist Muslim. Yeah. So fantastic, yeah. Yeah,
isn't it interesting? There are certain I don't exactly know where I'm going to go with this observation. I'm going to say something and then throw it to the three of you. But there are faith communities that are perceived to be exclusive to belief, and then there are those that are also perceived to be part of identity or even ethnicity. Mm-hmm. And I would say, for example, at the Jewish community, right? So if you're from Israel, if you live in Jerusalem, you be described by some as Jewish, but you may not be an observant Jew, right? And I think many people, especially, I don't know, maybe here in Alberta, if that's fair to say or not, would perceive Muslim to be the same thing. Whereas Christian seems to be a different context, or Catholic seems to be a different context. You know what I'm getting at?
I know exactly what you're getting at. You have cultural Christians, and then you have literal Christians.
Yes.
And with Christianity, and maybe it's just that I know Christianity better, but it's such a grey area between literal Christians, fundamental Christians, right the way through to people that, perhaps try to live by the guide of Jesus without really believing anything literally. There was a poll done, again, I think it was part of that 2012 poll I referenced earlier, that actually came back and said that fully 1/3 of all people that identify as Catholic don't believe in a God. It's you could. I think there are a lot of atheist Jews, and I think there's a number of atheist Muslims that are increasingly coming out.
I'm going to give the three of you something to think about as we head to break, and I'll get your response after this. Listener, it looks like their first text ever to the show, says Canada was built on Christian values, and if we get rid of Christianity in schools and hospitals to start, it'll just be replaced by some other dogma that doesn't reflect Canadian values. You don't see Canadians going to Africa or Middle Eastern countries and asking them to change their culture. We'll get our panel to respond in just a second. What a privilege to receive this news release. We've all been wondering, and I'm so excited to tell you about this amid horrific circumstance following that crash. The Humboldt Broncos, obviously in the community of Humboldt, forever impacted by that disastrous circumstance, the loss of those 16 cherished lives. I'm thrilled to tell you that today the Humboldt Broncos Hockey Club has announced that they will hit the ice for the 2018-19 SJHL season, starting with a head coach and recruitment process and then an 80-player invite-only camp. May 25th to 27th. They'll bring in 80 prospective players. It will not be open to the public or to media, and season tickets will go on sale soon. All of us are fans of the Humboldt Broncos. Isn't that unbelievable? Sometimes we just got to make a hockey note because this is a life note. This is a community note. Humboldt strong. Karen Lumley-Kerr, Luke Fevin, and Bradley Peter, our guests in studio. We don't have a ton of time left, but it was an interesting comment on the text line here. A listener says, Canada was built on Christian values. If we get rid of them, it'll be replaced by some other dogma. It doesn't reflect Canadian values. You don't see Canadians going to Africa asking them to change their culture, which is like an amazing thing to say. But Karen?
I just was a little bit flabbergasted because I don't think Canada was built on Christian values, or if you are going to claim that, then that's what colonialism was, and I'm not so sure that we should value that.
Yeah, if you're thinking that we can't have, publicly funded hospitals that aren't Christian, I think that's ridiculous. How about your new dogma is the charter, and which says you have freedom of religion, but also freedom from religion. So I think let's go that way, and I think we'll be fine.
Luke, take us into the weekend.
We came in as a technologically advanced society. We raped, murdered, and stole the land out from under the people that lived here, and then we proceeded to treat them like second-class citizens for the next couple of centuries. That's not the Christianity I know.
Luke Fevin, Karen Lumley-Kerr, Bradley Peter, thank you for being here. All three of you, among many others, will be attending the Alberta Secular Conference. You can Google it for more or check out 630ched.com. What a week it's been. Great discussion, Ched Nation. That's why we show up every day. We'll talk to you Monday. One love.
The Ryan Jespersen Show, weekday mornings at 9 on 630 Ched.